Hi. So I thought about what the motivation would be for talking about this some more. I've already covered it a little bit. That was to do with the recent passing of the recent death of my mother, Mary Roberts. Which, if you've watched that video, it's called "Something Has Happened." I'm very sad. That was about late December 2020. Then you know that there was some issues with my relations. I'm not going to call them family anymore because apart from my mother and father, my family, in quotes, has behaved pretty poorly towards me, including the person who I was talking about in the video, my brother, in quotes. So I suggest if you're interested in this at all, there's a reason why I'm going to talk about this. I had to look at the motivation of it, and it's not to dump on relatives or anything, but you might gain something out of this. There might be something that you find of use, or that you can relate to and feel like you're not alone. And so that's why I'm going to talk about this. And also I want to talk about a little bit about aged care homes, and also medical assisted dying and that kind of thing. And there's some other things as well. So if you don't have problems with those topics, if they don't sort of upset you in any way, talking about death and suffering, then please continue on watching this. And you can, as I said, it's probably so I don't have to go into the whole thing about my brother, in quotes, who had a lifelong animosity towards me of unknown origin. Let's just put it in that nutshell. Who I tried many times to connect with, but he refused to, and this is right from when I was a child. So who knows what was going on there, but that created a rift with the family, where he poisoned the well against me with other members of the family, in quotes. And that made it very difficult, and that all reared its ugly head at the deathbed of my mother. Unfortunately, a couple of those particular immediate family members of his family started sort of dumping on me across the bed from my dying mother. So that was fun. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and talk about my experience with nursing homes in Queensland. This particular nursing home that my mother was in for 6 months, and I pulled her out of at the last, in the last week. But So I'll just go back to the time where I did a video that you probably saw if you follow this channel, which it's very windy at the moment, so I hope that you can hear me okay. About where I talked about going away, and I wasn't sure how long I was going to go away for, and that was probably in late March 2021. I did that video, and I said that we were going to go up and look after Mum, who was in a nursing home at the time, but it seemed like the things weren't going very well in the nursing home, so we were going to go up and take her back home to her home, which she still had, and on the Gold Coast, and then we were going to look after her until she died, basically. And then just before we were ready to go, when I used to call Mum every day, and had done for many years. Pretty much every day I would call her, and I'd been speaking to her, of course, in the nursing home every day. And of course we were going to go up in the early part of 2020, but then COVID happened, and so we never got to go up there. And then I was very reluctant to go up there without a vaccine, and hotspots kept popping up around Australia, and so I was very reluctant to actually go there without a vaccine and with hotspots coming up, because COVID is no fun, and COVID long haul symptoms are definitely no fun. So anyway, so then my mother went into the nursing home in October 2020, and then my brother, in quotes, died late December 2020, and he was doing most of the looking after, like financial affairs and things like that, and visiting Mum in the nursing home. And I'd done many years of looking after Mum in the 2000s, before coming to Tasmania in 2007. So I'd done a lot of looking after, and then he basically took over after I left to Tasmania in late 2007. So anyway, so he died, and then so I was having to communicate with his children, one of his children, who became also an enduring power of attorney, as I was. So the both of us shared that particular enduring power of attorney, and so we were getting along quite nicely, his daughter and myself. Her name was I'll just say Elle. So Elle and I were getting on very well. And anyway, so and then of course as I was saying, I was ringing Mum as I usually do almost every day, and I noticed that she was, even though she told me she was doing walking of corridors and stuff, she was having more and more trouble sort of like answering the telephone. And I thought, well, she's either losing it mentally, or she's actually so weak she can't answer the telephone. So anyway, this one day, which was probably, it was about 5 days or 4 days before she died, I rang her up, and the nurse in quotes, because there's not many nurses in this particular nursing home, which is the case with many nursing homes now in Australia. This particular personal care assistant, I'll call them, said that Mum's blood pressure was low, and so I sort of, and she said that she'd asked Mum, did you want to go to the hospital, and Mum said no, which is kind of a ridiculous thing for anybody to ask somebody who's very, very weak, do they want to move and go through all the stress of going to another place. They're probably going to say no, particularly if they're feeling very sick. So I kind of so I sort of insisted that she send Mum off to a hospital to have to have a looked at, because she sounded very weak to me on the phone. So anyway, I rang back 2 hours later expecting for Mum to be already gone, and she said, oh no, she's still here. So I had to kind of push them to discharge my mother, to send her to a hospital to be looked at. And this is what happens when you have a for-profit industry where they want the patient to remain in their care, because they continue to get money. So they can kind of sort of siphon money off those particular clients until the bitter end, even though they're not getting the sort of care that they should be getting. So anyway, she was taken. I insisted, and she was taken to the hospital, and I rang up the hospital. It was a private hospital on the Gold Coast, and the doctor said to me, you'll have to get up here as soon as possible, because she's never going to leave the hospital. She's probably going to die in the next few days. And I said, he said she's got acute renal failure, and I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being really bad, what is it? And he said it's about a 9.5. So I, that's when my partner and I decided to go to the Gold Coast. We left, I think it was the next day, and luckily we left then, because we were planning on being there 5 days after that phone call. We had already bought a ticket and everything, and she would have been gone by then. She would have gone the day before. So lucky we left the next day, and we managed to have 4 days with her before she died. And the problem with this acute renal failure is that she'd actually had probably chronic renal failure for probably at least 1.5 years, and nobody had mentioned that to me. I'm talking about not her GP or anybody, and my brother had certainly not mentioned that to me, and I don't even know whether anybody even took any notice of that, which is really strange, even though she was very, very old. I mean, we're talking much older than most people who die are. She was 104 when she died, but she was completely compos mentis. So because she was completely compos mentis, that is a good reason, of course, to do what you can to assist somebody who is having physical difficulties. Of course, you would expect somebody, the medical profession would want to help anybody who has physical difficulties, but when they get to that age, they kind of blow a lot of things off and go, oh no, well, they're really too old, and you shouldn't, it would be unethical to do anything. That's not necessarily the case when somebody is completely compos mentis, which Mum was, right to literally the day before she died. I mean, she could rattle off my mobile phone number, and you could have a perfectly normal conversation with her until she went out to it on morphine. So my problem with that whole acute renal failure thing was that when she went into acute renal failure, the doctor who was looking after her in this this privately owned nursing home, which I didn't, by the way, have any say in what nursing home she went into, because my brother basically never bothered to ever include me in any deliberations, including deliberations about the will, which is another story I'm not going to go into, but needless to say, that wasn't a good thing. as you can imagine, having somebody who has contempt for you having say in a will. Fortunately, my mother is fairly fair, so that didn't turn out completely, I'm sure, how he might have liked it to, but there you go. So anyway, the doctor who was looking after Mum in this nursing home, basically, she sent Mum along for some tests about 4 weeks before she died, CT scans of her throat and chest and everything, because she was having trouble, keeping things down. She was dry retching and everything. Now, I just assume, having a health background, being an RN, a former RN, that she would have taken a blood test at some point, and it would have been very clear that Mum was at least had chronic renal failure. But certainly, you would imagine, I know acute renal failure can happen suddenly, but it doesn't just happen out of the blue usually without some sort of telltale signs coming through. So here she is sending her off for all these expensive tests. And by the way, we had to arrange for transport. The nursing home wasn't arranging transport, which is amazing. I really hated that nursing home, I really have to say, and unfortunately I wasn't able to get her out of there. So anyway, so nobody told me that she had acute renal failure. And if I'd known she had even chronic renal failure, I probably would have gotten her out sooner and put her into a hospital. But the acute renal failure was probably happening at least probably a month before she died, and I got her out sort of close to the end, because nobody was telling me anything. Even the nurses in that nursing home weren't communicating with me, and my relatives weren't really telling me anything, and my mother wasn't really telling me anything, except that she was having trouble eating. She'd been having trouble eating for ages, but she'd basically stopped eating, and she was drinking these nutritional drinks, which they weren't keeping an eye on, and she wasn't really getting adequate hydration. So anyway, all this sort of was going on, and nobody was telling me anything of any worth. And the fact that the doctor never told me she had, or even if she knew, I don't know, that she had acute renal failure. I mean, I would have gotten her out a month beforehand, and maybe she would have died sooner, because but she wouldn't have gone through the suffering that she went through in that home. And luckily, we got her out at 4 days before she died, because at least she was in a hospital setting. But when we were in the hospital with her, and I came in to see her with my partner, and I had a look at her, took one look at her, because I knew she was going to look bad. But I looked at her and I just thought, oh my God, she looked like she should have been in a hospice, truly. I mean, she just looks sort of skeletal looking in the face, and just not like Mum at all, really. Just, Mum usually had sort of some kind of animation, but she was so sick that, she could barely kind of lift her head up to sort of, say hello. And when she realized it was me, she went, oh, Tricia. Anyway, so, and by the way, one of the relatives, the sister of Elle, the person I call Elle, who I share the enduring power of attorney, and I'll call her A, she had sent me a text about 5 weeks before I saw her at the hospital. And it was something to the effect of that you don't care about your mother. If you cared about your mother, you would have done this and this and this, and you'd be here now, and da-da-da-da-da. I mean, just sort of disgusting, despicable sort of assumptions and judgments and stuff. I mean, this is amazing, because they barely have anything to say to me at all. Peter, my brother's, sort of immediate family, and then she chooses to do that. So I basically blocked her on my phone, because I thought, I don't need that shit from anybody, particularly someone who calls themselves a niece. So I sort of blocked her on the phone, and I said to Elle, her sister, I told her what she said to me, and I said, look, I don't want to hear from her. I don't want to hear from A again. I didn't say that permanently, but I just said again, meaning while I'm trying to, organize things for Mum with her, with Elle, and all this kind of thing. So, and Elle at the time said to me, yes, I don't know why she said that. I hate these conflicts. Or she didn't say why she said that. She said, I don't understand why people want drama, and yes, I understand, sort of this seeking out conflict. So she seemed to be sort of understanding that it was probably not a good thing for A to say. So we continued on having a nice back and forth, trying to organise things for Mum and everything, since my brother had died. And I thought, maybe this is a turning point. Maybe, you know, I might have some sort of nice relationship with the rest of the family after all. You know, that maybe Peter, my brother, hasn't poisoned the well for forever. You know, with his own family and toward me, sort of thing. Turns out I was wrong. So anyway, but I'll get to that later. So anyhow, so when I saw my mother in the private hospital, and she looked really dreadful, and I was sitting on the floor while I was talking to her and holding her hand, and I started crying. She couldn't see me crying, but you know, it was really upsetting to see her like that, and I knew I'd be upset when I saw her, because I knew I could just tell by how she sounded on the phone that she was probably looking pretty awful. And by the way, it was a bit scary having to travel on airlines and stuff while COVID's still happening, while a lot of Australia isn't vaccinated, while I'm not vaccinated and my partner's not vaccinated. It was kind of scary having to do that, but it was like, well, you know, you just have to. And that was something I wanted to avoid. But you know, it was basically either it was a matter of have to, because I didn't want Mum in that awful nursing home, and I didn't want her to be. I wanted to see her in hospital, and I thought she's probably going to be dead in a few days. So we did. So that's just a by the by. So anyway, something that the two nieces I mentioned don't seem to comprehend, or didn't comprehend. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So anyway, so then, you know, they were still trying to get her to drink stuff, and I just said to the nurse, literally that night, I said, look, she really doesn't want to drink anymore. It really, you know, like this whole, she's been, you know, had the problems with the dry retching, which is due to the chronic renal failure, by the way, which never made sense to me why she, you know, because I've looked after a lot of old people in my time as a nurse, and dry retching isn't part of the aging issue, the aging problem. It you know, as you age, you don't have to get dry retching and stop eating altogether. I mean, that can happen right towards the end, but it's not a feature. So it never made sense to me. But after finding out about the acute renal failure, I thought, well, it makes absolute sense. But I was, you know, sort of questioning the doctor and saying, I don't really understand it, why she's got dry retching. And that doctor was just sort of saying, oh, we'll look into it with CT scans and stuff. Well, had she taken a blood test? Because it would have been very clear. But this is the amazing thing. She hadn't, if she had, she didn't let me know. And it should have been very, very clear why she was dry retching and had problems like that. So that was very upsetting to me, to find out she had acute renal failure, and that is why she was having those issues, you know, dry retching and nausea and stuff like that. And is why she wouldn't want to probably eat as well, because the more you put into your body, that has to be processed. It has to be processed by the kidneys, and the toxins build up. You know, so that made me angry to find that out, and to realize that doctor was doing all these unnecessary tests, and had she even had a blood test? So anyway, so I'd said to the nurse that night in the university, in the private hospital, I said, look, can we stop trying to give her drinks and stuff? She really isn't able to anymore, and it just seems really cruel. And I started crying and put my arms, the poor nurse, I put my arms around the nurse and I started crying, can we please stop, because it just seems so cruel. And she said, and I said, you know, really, can we sort of change to something else? Meaning, you know, can we stop trying to force this on her? She's literally 9.5 out of 10. Her kidneys are that bad. She's going to die, and it's going to be soon. Can we stop torturing her with trying to force her to drink fluids and stuff? And they had a drip. Fortunately, they had a drip happening. So she was getting like 83 mils an hour, which is a good amount of fluid. And she was actually able to talk to us. And so I had some really nice conversations, and she said some very nice things to me that I'll always remember. And I told her once again, because I always would tell her, you know, anytime I spoke to her, how much I loved her and stuff. I made sure I did that. And she said some lovely things to me, which I'll never forget. And, you know, they meant a lot to me, because Mum wasn't very forthcoming really with you know, feelings and stuff, but she did the best she could. So anyway, the nurse, her name's Helen, she, after I'd sort of cried on her shoulder and stuff, she sort of said to me, sure. And I said, look, you know, don't you think, I said to her, I think I said, don't you think maybe we could just employ, some of the palliative stuff toward mum, because really she can't drink anymore and stuff. And so they had her on the drip, and then they, and I said, what would you do, Helen? And she said, yeah, I would do the same thing. If she were my mother, I would do the same thing. I would stop trying to force drinks on her and start bringing in some morphine. So that's what they, and I was so relieved. I was so relieved because I just thought, how long are we going to drag this out? I mean, she can't eat. She's like skeletal looking. She is suffering, which is the worst thing. She's suffering, and I honestly don't know how she was able to walk. This is the other astonishing thing, is she was walking like 4 corridors. They were taking her for walks in this nursing home, and I was thinking, well, it can't be too bad. She's able to walk 4 corridors. But when I saw what she looked like, that she weighed about 30 kilos or something. This is what she looked like when I saw her, and I thought, how on earth? Where did she even have the musculature to actually walk those corridors? You know what I mean? Like, how on earth? So that was very deceptive to me, that she was walking these corridors and yet she was that sick. And I just thought, God, how cruel is that, to do that to somebody? This is all in retrospect, when I saw how she looked. And I thought, and that was so deceptive, because I didn't realize she was as bad as she was, because she was telling me that she was walking these corridors, which she actually was in the nursing home. So that was really messed up too. And thank God we got her out of that nursing home, because the private hospital wasn't that good with the management of like her palliative care, really. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And I think the nursing home would have been way worse, and they would have just left her they wouldn't have given her any sort of fluids. They wouldn't have done any investigations. They would have let her basically dehydrate to death. And maybe if we're lucky, maybe toward the end they might have employed some morphine. Who knows? I don't know. In retrospect, I don't trust that they really cared. They didn't want her to leave, to go to the hospital, even though the nurse asked her. But I mean, you don't ask patients that are really desperately sick, do you want to go to hospital? You just take them to hospital. So anyway, back to the private hospital. So Helen started employing that, and I stayed overnight. I basically stayed up for about 40 hours, and not all those 40 hours I was there, meaning the last there was 8 hours where I went home, but I couldn't sleep, and so I couldn't sleep during that time. And then and this is where it gets all kind of messed up. And I didn't need this at all, because losing your mother is hard enough as it is. Losing a parent is hard enough as it is. If of course there are people that have terrible relationships with their parents, but mine was, on the whole, it was quite good. We had our problems, mum and myself, but she was did her very, very best, and loved me, adopted me, loved me as much as possible. My parents gave me security. There was a lack of emotional interaction, though. Unfortunately, there was problems, but I mean, she loved me as much as she could, and that was a lot. So but this is the day when she died. This is the same day that she died. I went home in the morning after staying there all night, and then I came back with my partner, and at 4 o'clock I stayed home for about 8 hours, and then I went back with my partner at 4 o'clock. And it was one of my nieces, we'll call her A. It seemed like that she was competing in some weird way, as that she loved my mother more than I did. I know that sounds absolutely bizarre, but really that's what we put it down to, that she was in some sort of weird competition, and this is the same one that sent me that awful text message a few weeks earlier, basically saying I didn't care about my mother and all that sort of thing. Anyway, so when we went up at 4 o'clock, A and L, the 2 daughters of my brother Peter, my deceased brother Peter, they were there. And apparently the hospital was going to decide at 5 o'clock whether they, to bring in the COVID restrictions so that only certain people could be in the hospital. Now, my niece, we'll call her A, she said, she basically seemed to not understand that immediate family means children of the parent, and seemed to think that, this is what I'm gathering, because she never actually said as much, but she seemed to, they were basically going to wait it out till 5, even though they decided the day, that day that they were going to leave when we turned up at 4. They decided that they were going to stay, or rather A was going to kind of pressure L to stay, and see if we could sort of see, almost like this game of, I hate this species, this term, but a game of chicken, to see who was going to leave first. And I think she was hoping that we were going to then be excluded by the hospital because of the COVID thing. We wouldn't be allowed back in, and that would mean that A and L got to stay there and be with Mum and possibly be there when she died. This was, I think, her plan. And when we walked into the room, I mean, this is what I had to deal with. Seriously, you couldn't make this up. This is what my partner and I gathered about this behaviour. And when we walked in, A was sitting in the chair, and she was doing this sort of thing and getting real and throwing kind of rugs down, like covers and things down. And I'd said to my partner before we left to go to the hospital, I said, I bet you A is going to cause a problem when we get up there. I just feel it. I just feel like she's going to be a problem, and she's going to cause a problem. And sure enough, so so here she is kind of, and she didn't sort of get up and sort of like, well, good, we'll see you later, we'll see you tomorrow or whatever. No, she just sort of hunkered down, and Elle just went along with it. And so I just sort of sat there. So I just thought, oh, this is great. This is great. This is what I need. Somebody who's got whatever issues, mummy issues or whatever. She's didn't get enough love from her mother, or she isn't getting enough love in general, and she's decided this is some sort of weird fucking competition between who loves my mother more, me or her. I mean, you couldn't make this shit up, seriously. Like I feel like dealing with that shit, really, when my mother's dying. So anyway, So anyway, I could see that, she was just going to just not go. They were not going to go, that she was going to stay there, and then hope that Dee and I, hope that my partner and I would sort of relent and just kind of go, because they weren't going. And so I was sitting there, and then she was doing all this sort of, A was doing all this kind of weird passive aggressive stuff, like she said out in the waiting area that my partner wasn't family. And I said, excuse me, but my partner is absolutely family. That is totally inappropriate to say that. So anyway, when I was in the room with A and L and my partner, I said, she was sort of doing all this kind of passive aggressive stuff. Fortunately, my mother was out of it on morphine by that stage, so she didn't know what was happening. And I said, in response to this passive aggressiveness, I said, listen, you haven't apologized for that awful text message you sent me saying that I didn't care about my mother. And she said, well, I still think you don't care about your mother. This is what she said to me across the bed of my dying mother. And I said, and it basically, then I really saw red, but I kept it together. And I looked at Elle, and I said, and do you really think I want to be in a room with alone in a room with somebody who has that sort of attitude to me? I mean, really and truly, do you really think so? And I said that she thinks that I don't care about my mother. Would I want to be alone with somebody like that at this point? And then I got up, and Elle sort of went, Trish, like your mother can hear. Like she didn't, I mean, seriously, like the A was being totally passive aggressive, and I respond to that. And then suddenly it's like, Trish, what are you saying in front of your mother? I said, that was amazing to me. But anyway, so I took A over to the door, and I said, why would I care? Or why would I care about the opinion of someone who barely talks to me and knows nothing about me? I don't. And then I just walked back over to the end of the bed, and then A decided, she sort of got all kind of, for want of a better word, sheepish, and kind of said, come on, Linda, didn't say anything. So it was dead silence. It was bizarre, but it was dead silence. I basically kind of told her, basically that was all I said really, was about why would I want to be alone with someone who has that opinion of me, and also why would I care about someone who barely talks to me and who doesn't know me? Why would I care about the opinion of that person? So anyway, that was enough to send her off, and she said, are you coming, Elle? And Elle just sat beside me she sat beside me, and I said, Elle, why, we've been getting on so well since your father died. Why, why does it have to be like this? You and I are getting on so well. We were actually having a nice chat in the room before, and I think A couldn't stand it that we were all getting on really well, and she just had to throw a grenade in it, basically, which is just so hurtful, because like now it's like L has gone along with the pressure from A, and since that moment in the bed thing, in the bedside, has not really been friendly toward me. We did some back and forth texts about what she wanted to happen at the funeral, because I was organising the funeral, because she said she didn't want to after Mum died. She said she didn't. I said, do you want to? And she said no, and so I said fine, I'll do it. And so there was a bit of organising back and forth. No, thank you for organising. No kind of are you okay or anything. No one's asked me anything like that. So anyway, they left, and that was really, in many ways, a blessing in disguise. Really, it was in many ways having that, saying those awful things to me again, like doubling down on it, which I said to her in the room. I said, "Oh, now you're doubling down on it again. Great." But that actually turned out to be a blessing, because really it ended up that my partner and I were there when Mum died, and we were able to do something to help her suffering, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. So that was, and also the fact that that Elle decided to relinquish any sort of organising thing of the funeral, and allowed me to do it, and I think it actually turned out to be a very nice funeral. Lots of people said it was a lovely send-off for Mum. But anyway, so they went off in a huff. Andrew A went off in a huff, and sort of said, "Come on, Elle," and off they went. So, and then they couldn't. So anyway, that evening, kind of, Mum was still out to it, of course, on morphine, and that was how it was going to be, I guess, until she died. But about around probably about 9:30. They did a pressure area care where you turn the patient so that they don't get sores, and she already had a sore from the nursing home, so she was like really kind of skeletal looking, really, at this point, and so that's very easy to get a sore too. So I won't blame that entirely on the nursing home. So anyway, this so this nurse had turned was doing her pressure area. This nurse was doing her pressure areas, and it stirred up a whole bunch of phlegm in my mother's lungs, and then she suddenly had trouble breathing, and that was really bad, because this nurse didn't. The other nurses that had looked after Mum were very competent and stuff, but this nurse seemed to be really green, and she left Mum laying on her back, slightly elevated her head and everything, but Mum was obviously having trouble breathing because of all the sudden stirring up of sputum and stuff in her lungs, and she was kind of gurgling away, and her colour was going off, and so I before the nurse did this pressure area, I asked them could they up her morphine dose, to every 2 hours. So she'd given her some morphine just before this, and I was thinking, great, because I'd actually asked her to do that, because for some reason Mum's skin had become incredibly sensitive. I don't know what was going on there, but like you just touch her slightly, and it was like you'd kind of jabbed her with a knife. It was really weird. And so when she was sort of like, the pressure areas, I think, made her feel really uncomfortable. I told them that already, that that she had very sensitive skin. But I mean, and the nurse was doing mouth toilet sort of stuff, mouth cleaning, which is a good thing to do, but all of that really worked Mum up. Even though she was out to it on morphine, you could see it her eyes were like this, and it was obviously causing great discomfort. And then all this sort of gurgling away of sputum and everything, the whole thing, she looked very distressed. This is after the morphine and after the pressure area care. And that's when I sort of thought, I was expecting to go back in the room and see, Dee Dee, my partner, was in the room with Mum and the nurse, and I came back in and then saw Mum was in this sort of distress, and the nurse had gone. The nurse had gone, and I came in and I said, come over here to my partner, and I said, let's pull her over on her side, because she was on her back, which is ridiculous. And we pulled her over. We both pulled her over on her side, and we stuffed some pillows down her back to keep her on her side, which was not great. We could have done a better job, but I was sort of going to then quickly go out and try and get some assistance. And I said to the first nurse I came across, do you think you could give some suctioning to my mother? She's really kind of having a lot of trouble with, she's sort of turning slight blue and stuff. I mean, it's bad. Can you please give it suction? And she was on oxygen, by the way, too. But and by the way, I forgot to mention, after a day and a half, they removed her drip, and that's when Dee Dee and I knew that's when my partner and I knew that they had given up then totally, and they were going to just, give her morphine and let her die. So, and the minute they took her off the drip, she went downhill immediately, which is kind of understandable. But they didn't tell me that they were going to take her off the drip, because it would have been great if we could have had a bit more time with her, talking with her, because the minute she went off the drip, they put her on the morphine and made some nonsense that, oh, well, her potassium levels are really good now, so we've taken her off the drip. I mean, seriously, I don't know who they thought they were talking to, but anyway, so we knew that, that she was definitely going to go quickly once she was off the drip, because she wasn't drinking and she wasn't eating and all of that. So, and I get it. The palliative care, she needed palliative nursing at that point. But I mean, it would be nice to inform relatives what you're doing, but they didn't. So, so anyway, back to after they did the pressure area thing. So once I got the nurse in, she gave her a drug that dried up the secretions, and she had given her some suctioning, but that actually didn't make a whole lot of difference, the suctioning. But it was then that I sort of, she was looking really distressed, and she was still her fingernails were starting to turn blue, which indicates, it's not great. It's bad, so, and she looked, and her eyes were wide, and you could see that she was distressed. She was really distressed and anxious, and it was awful. And so it took me about half an hour of running around to different nurses to finally find a nurse that would give her that recommended palliative sedation that the renal doctor, the specialist, had suggested that she go on, and then decided to go with morphine instead. And the cocktail was midazolam, which is the drug that they tend to give patients when you're in theatre and you count backwards and you 99, 98, and then you're unconscious and you don't know anything. So there's midazolam and morphine and Maxilon. Maxilon is an antiemetic, so to counteract the vomiting that might occur with the morphine. So you get this cocktail which they use around the world, which is palliative sedation that keeps the patient under, consciously and stuff, and it's sort of much more kind. If you can't do a medically assisted end, meaning you literally end somebody's life, in these clinics, then the next best thing is this palliative sedation. So I asked them, and I don't know why I wasn't happy that they didn't put her immediately on that drip of palliative sedation with those 3 drugs in it. It would have been much better if they'd done that, but they didn't. I don't know why they opted for morphine, although the morphine looked like it held her. But, when this happened, she looked really distressed. So I had to go around to 5 different nurses. I felt a little bit like Shirley MacLaine in terms of endearment, except I didn't do the screaming at the end. I don't know if you know that movie, when her daughter was dying and she was trying to get pain relief and stuff. But anyway, I didn't do quite that, no, but I sort of was being assertive and sort of, saying, and finally found a nurse that thought that was a good idea. Because I said, what are we doing here? I mean, she's, but basically she's at the end and she's suffering right now. She's turning kind of blue and gurgling away. What are we doing here? I was thinking, what are we actually trying to do? What are we... she's dying, she's close to dying. Why are we dragging this out? I didn't mean, though, for them to, and this is sort of a weird thing, but in many ways it's okay that it happened. They'd given her that morphine, and usually you always write down dangerous drugs. You write them down in a book, and you write down the time that you give it, and you always have a nurse usually with you that checks the dose and checks that it's the right drug and that it's going to where it's supposed to be going, and you write it down in the book and all of that kind of thing. So it's very carefully recorded. And so the nurse that came back with this, after I'd managed to convince her to please do this drug cocktail, and Mum had a subcutaneous cannula in her abdomen so that they could put it in there so they didn't have to be sticking needles in her. So she went in to the room, and I thought, oh great, she's going to give her that. And I was thinking, that's fairly close to the other morphine injection that she'd had probably an hour beforehand. because for about an hour she was suffering, and it was about 45 minutes she was really suffering and turning slightly blue and all of that. It was really awful. And my partner, being the wonderful person that she is, was standing there with Mum while I was trying to round up nurses and get somebody to do something. She was holding Mum's hand and saying nice things to her, and being reassuring and stuff, even though Mum really wasn't that compos mentis, but she was awakened. She was conscious enough to be in distress and showing distress, and her color was right off. So, but my wonderful partner was there while I was trying to round up the nurses. Anyway, so I came in, and the nurse was giving those 3 injections, and I thought, great. And so I went outside, because to be really honest with you, I was having trouble seeing Mum the way she was, with the color and stuff. And I thought, okay, well, I've got the nurse to do that, but I didn't expect what was going to happen next. And I just went out of the room for, like, it was probably 2 minutes to send him 2 minutes to just kind of relax a little bit and thinking she'll be okay now, or at least she'll be put under, and she'll and then maybe they can continue on with that regime of cocktail. But anyway, and literally, like, it was about 2 or 3 minutes afterwards, my partner called me. I was just outside. I was just literally about 30 steps away from the room, sort of thing, just looking out and just kind of feeling like everything was going to be okay. And my partner said to me, "Oh, you better get in here, Tricia, your Mum's dying," sort of thing. So I as I was going in, I quickly called Linda and said, Mum's dying, and sort of I hung up, and then I ran in, and I kind of went over to her, and she was literally taking her last breaths. It was like that combination was enough to kind of, and on top of the morphine they'd given an hour before. And by the way, they'd actually said to me they were okay with giving her hourly morphine. They told me that earlier in the evening, so I guess they probably didn't think that was going to kill Mum, basically, but turns out that it did. With the combination and stuff. So that's what happened. Like, I went and held her hand, and she went from being a palish blue. Well, when I walked out of the room for those 3 minutes, she was a kind of a palish blue, and then she went to completely white. Her hands were white, her face was white, and I was just looking at her eyes, her blue eyes, and I said some prayers, and Dee Dee, my partner, said some prayers. She was on the other side of the bed, but I held her hand, and she was taking her last breaths. I could see that was the end, and she was, I could see, so I said some Catholic prayers for her because she's Catholic. I said, Our Father, and I said, Hail Mary, and I said, the Lord's my shepherd, that one. And then I said some other things in my head as well, and Dee Dee did as well. And we also just kind of, I also said to her, look, I said, don't be afraid. I stroked her hair, and I said, just go into the light, just go into the beautiful, blissful light. And I looked up, because often when people are dying or they're having near-death experiences, you hear about them being up above and looking down at their body. So I looked up and I said, I love you, Mum. And I said that a few times, before she took her last breath. And so I think she probably knew we were there. She knew my partner was there. She knew I was there. And it was really hard. It was really hard to witness that. It was worse witnessing her suffering and struggling for breath. That was much worse. It was almost like a release and a relief when I saw her take her last breath, because I thought, thank God she's not struggling for breath and turning blue. So that was very, very distressing, and I have to try not to dwell on that part of it. It was distressing, and it was really distressing too. I could see her pupils widen, which meant that her, she was, almost dead, like meaning her heart had stopped and her brain was probably, was deprived of oxygen, and her pupils dilated, and I knew she was gone. And I just stroked her head and sort of said some more prayers, some Catholic prayers for her, and said some reassuring things, told her I loved her, and Dee Dee did too, and my partner did too. And and it was almost a relief actually to see her not struggling anymore, but it was also sort of shocking because it happened so quickly. Suddenly she was gone, and I didn't expect that cocktail would basically end things like that. I thought it might calm her down, but I didn't expect that it would sort of end things. But then I sort of thought, well, what is the difference if it dragged on for another few hours and they did that? The whole idea of it was for that to happen anyway. I mean, you probably already know this, or maybe you don't, but I mean, hospitals have been practicing euthanasia, medical assisted euthanasia for decades. They just don't say that, but I mean, I've seen it. It's something that's been done for decades in hospitals, and probably a lot longer than that, a lot longer than I'm aware of. So it's not something unusual, and but anyway, but even though it's actually not legal in Queensland now, it's medical assisted deaths are legal in Tasmania. But anyway, so it's getting dark here, so I might end this up. Maybe I'll end it later on and post it. I don't know. That was really unfortunate that the nurse didn't seem to know what to do, and I ended up having to give basically directions and sort of get that cocktail happening, because nobody was going to do that, and they seemed to be going to just leave her suffering like that. Which is crazy. She could have gone on and on and on like that, like meaning for another 2 or 3 hours. And the other problem is that if my nieces had still been there at instead of going home in a huff, they wouldn't have known what to do. Like, it was only that I knew the names of these drugs, and that I basically had a sort of a confidence that medical people can have in those situations, that I was able to convince that nurse to do that. And she was okay with it. She wouldn't have done it if she didn't think it was a good thing to do. But if my nieces had been there, she would have been suffering for a few hours. And even then, even after, and then all they could say to me, my nieces, were that they were angry that they weren't there when she died. Not that thank you for helping grandma, sort of not suffer anymore, and thank you for being there. No, they just complained about that. And so basically, I'll just round it up here and say that it was pretty awful. It's bad enough when you lose your mother. Hang on, I might go over to the window here. I'll get a bit of light here. So it's bad enough when you lose your mother without having relatives carry on the contempt that their father had, and basically make it, basically, like when I went to the funeral, I arranged the funeral. It was a really lovely funeral, but nobody came up to me or my partner and said, I'm sorry if I'm sorry that your mum is gone, because I'm the only remaining family member now. My sister died when I was 17. She was 19. She died of a suicide overdose. My brother, in quotes, died at the end of last year, and my father died 8 years ago, and my mother is dead now. And so there's nobody left in my family. Not one of those people, including my brother's wife, had sort of said anything to me, came anywhere near me, and I had to look after the elderly priest that was doing this service. Mum wanted this elderly priest that she'd known for many decades to do the service, so I had to look after him because he was so frail. He was 87. Nobody said, oh, look, Tricia, can I look after Father Vince for you, and you can just, No, nobody did that. So it was just my partner and I sitting on the left, and the rest of the Peter's family on the right. Nobody came up to me. They didn't even ask me. They didn't even, when we went to the graveside to have the coffin lowered and all of that little ceremony. No, I had to take Father Vince there and hold his arm and help him. Nobody sort of, did anything, and nobody came up to me and said anything. So basically, that's the sort of and this is why when I say family to me are people who care about you and show support and are kind to you. And blood families aren't oftentimes not that. They're usually the opposite. They usually say sadistic things and do sadistic acts that probably nobody else would do. For some reason, families, in quotes, tend to be the most sadistic and mean-spirited that you'll experience on the planet. There are people who have lovely families, but in the majority of people have problems with their families. And so that is the sort of, that has probably not done me any favors, having lost my mother and then having these people be so unfortunate and basically not even no communication, which is on one hand is a really great thing, because I'm really over that sort of thing, and my mother dying, as awful as that and sad as that is, and I miss her terribly. It's really hard, but at least I don't have to deal with those people anymore. Unfortunately, Elle's husband is actually has been fairly nice and doesn't really understand why this nonsense has been going on with the family. Thinks it's really sad, but he's actually, we deal with him for any financial stuff from then on, and then, but after that finishes, after everything after the will is all settled and everything, I would be surprised if I hear from any of them. And that's fine, because they've been nothing but at best ignore me, and at worst attack me like that in the hospital, and I didn't need that. And it doesn't do anything for you when you're trying to deal with the loss of such a significant relationship. But unfortunately, I'm astonished that anybody would do that to anybody, would say that kind of thing across the bed of their dying mother. I'm also appalled at that nursing home and the way they allowed my mother to suffer like that. And had I known she was in such a dire way, I would have gotten her out of there into a hospital earlier than that. So I'm really sorry that my brother had chosen such an awful place, even though that was supposed to be one of the better ones. And that makes me worry about, I don't know, I don't think I think I'd rather off myself than end up in a nursing home, really. I mean, really, it's if you don't have, even with people, even with relatives, who, you know, relatives can be really clueless about medical stuff, and if that's the way they deal with acute renal failure, you know, I mean, that's appalling. But anyway, so I just wanted to tell you that story, because I mentioned it, that I would probably tell it. I probably could have told it better, and of course it's very, very dark now, and I probably look really ghoulish with all the with the lighting and everything. Sorry about that. But anyway, I just wanted to share that experience, because it was kind of traumatic, but it was also really good. In fact, you know how I usually can see a silver lining in things. I can usually find, without being odd, I can usually find a silver lining with pretty much everything. And the silver lining in this is that because my niece A decided to be a really unpleasant piece of work, that actually, we managed to get them out, and they couldn't come back, really, because of COVID. They couldn't come back into the hospital, and that meant that I got to spend quality time with Mum while we had to wait for about 6 hours. It was 5 in the morning by the time she died, at 10:30 p.m. on the 29th of March 2021, and it wasn't until 5 a.m. before the people from the funeral home were able to come and collect her body. And so we got to just sit there in the room with Mum, you know, and sort of, and then just kind of, we didn't have those two in there with us, you know, who would have been able to get back in. Had it been for COVID, they would have been able to come back, and I would have had to have been in the room with Mum, with that A person who had just been really, really awful to me. So there was the blessing of them leaving because A had said that awful thing, and then not being able to return because of the COVID restrictions that evening after Mum died, and also them relinquishing the organising of the funeral. I got to organise the funeral, and it was really, really lovely. I got a lovely coffin for Mum, which I'm going to show you a photo of, and we had I did this really nice slideshow, which I may even tack on to the end of this, and it had Eva Cassidy singing I Know You by Heart, and also there was another song she sang in that, which was what was it called, Where Does the Time Go? And so I can't, unfortunately, if I tack the slideshow onto the end of this, unfortunately it won't have the beautiful music because of copyright reasons. YouTube will spit the dummy and won't allow me to, and you know, it'll be a problem. But I might tack the slideshow on, and then you get to see Mum in various stages of her life. I may add some kind of music to it just because, but anyway, but so they had the lovely slideshow that I made up while I was up there. It was 11 minutes long, and the priest was the priest that Mum wanted, and the funeral director, it was amazing. He was actually gay, and the funeral place was really, really, really good, and it was lovely organising the funeral with this gay funeral director. He was lovely, so we all laughed that we were all family, you know, and because I think my brother's family might be homophobic too, and that was part of the otherization toward the end there, and saying things like, you know, Dee Dee, my partner isn't family, and that kind of thing. So anyway, but yes, it was a lovely funeral, and so I got to organize that. So, you know, even though those things are awful, and I still kind of feel very sad about it and sort of angry that somebody would do something and say something like that at a time like that, but ultimately it was actually a really good thing because of all those things I mentioned. Anyway, I'll round it up here. It's going on 1 hour and 6 minutes, and that took a long time to say. So thanks so much for all the kind words that you've as I've said before, you've been, my friends online and offline have been more kind to me in 24 hours than all my extended relatives put together. have been in my entire life. So I want to thank you very much for that. And I may tack this slideshow on the end. That'll make it probably a little bit longer, but it doesn't matter now. It's so long anyhow. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks for all your support. And if I think of anything else, I probably could have covered some more topics in this, but that will do for now. So thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Viga. Rest in power and peace, my beloved mother. You're part of the one now.